I'm Gerard, and on behalf of LAMSIG, we'd like to welcome Sandy, Nick, Sandra, and Josh to the panel, and also a big thank you to Jenny for hosting it today. And a big thank you to the LAMSIG committee for putting it all together, and we hope you have fun. So Jenny, over to you.
Okay, thanks. Gerhard, Gerard, Jerry, I'm not sure. Conversation about your name. Anyway, well, yeah, welcome. As you said, welcome to the second LAMSIG panel. The last one was a couple of weeks ago, and it is available on video if anybody didn't get to see it. There's a recording. So here we are in COVID-19 times. We're still here. We are slowly coming out of lockdown. This panel looks at our situation, the ELT situation right now in COVID-19 times and coming out, but from the academic perspective. So I'm really delighted that we've been able to get people along who are in that academic manager position in one way or another, apart from Nick, who's in the materials position. And we're going to have a look at what our schools are looking like now. Some of us are right in the middle of coming out of it all. And how will they change, and what effect will that have on our academic managers, academic teams, and so on. So I'm really delighted to introduce Josh, first of all. Josh works at St Giles Central in London, and he's also just recently working at St Giles Live as well, and that's what he's going to be talking to us about right now. Josh.
Okay, thanks Jenny, and good morning everyone. So as Jenny said, yeah, I work for St Giles, and just a quick bit of context, we're a group of schools. We've got 5 in the UK and 2 in North America. We run intensive courses, so basically the model with students coming to us, studying with us, staying with us, and having that sort of experience. So when faced with lockdown, our solution was to transfer students from across our schools into this new single online school. And we've had to build this school from scratch, and we had a lead time of around 2 days. So it's been difficult. This is what I've been working on full time through this crisis. I just want to say, first of all, as well, that I feel really lucky to have had this opportunity. I mean, a lot of my peers have either lost their job or been on furlough the whole time. So it's been an opportunity and a real learning experience. And I think, despite the introduction there, I'm probably going to talk a bit more about what happened, not so much on the what now. What I've found is that one of the main features of working through a crisis is there really is an absolute focus on the present, and it is quite difficult to just get your head up and look ahead. But I'll share some reflections on the challenges, and of course we can talk through the panel discussion about what's going on and what's coming up. So the areas of difficulty, the challenges I want to just sort of go over are sort of 3 or 4 areas: systems, communication, people, and this experience of working through a crisis. And so first of all, systems. Well, of course, a lot of our schools, there's paper-based systems in many, many areas. So we've had to find solutions, and in that transition to online. Just things like registers for attendance and monitoring under 18s, our progress tests, our tutorial system, the administration for teachers, records of work and planners and so on. And those key moments in the learner journey, that welcome to the school, the placement test, the orientation, we've obviously had to adapt and find new solutions here. And then a big area is materials. In our schools, we're using course books primarily. Students in our different schools going into lockdown with different course books. So a big area that we've needed to work on, and a lot of thanks to the publishers who in many aspects have been really supportive. Particularly we've worked with Millin and OUP, so a shout out to them, thanks to them. And I'm sure Nick can talk more about materials and how we perhaps could have adapted. But we found solutions there. And then the system of our course delivery, that communicative approach, the learner-centered classroom, and the intensive courses we run, 20 lessons or 28 lessons a week, we've more or less replicated them, which was partly a business decision. But we've obviously learned that we've needed to adapt that approach, and we've had to sort of learn as we go. So that's systems. Communication, another big area. Obviously, in our schools, that main channel of communication, that sort of management by walking about, the interaction you have with your team, your students, the office with its welcoming open door, that channel is all gone and it's not available. So unfortunately, email becomes the primary mode of communication. And particularly at the start, my inbox just went into meltdown. It was just crazy. It was frenetic. And the problem is, of course, that there's so much information that you need to pass on. So there's a real danger of overload. There's an avalanche of emails just coming in and going out. So the importance of just being clear on your messages and repeating those messages, over communicating if necessary. And then finding alternatives to that sort of main mode of communication, having virtual staff rooms, having team meetings and online one-to-ones and drop-ins for your students. The other big area is sort of people management, staffing, HR, really, really problematic and difficult, obviously working remotely. And first of all, the sort of what we found is a shift away from the normal teacher competencies you might need. So number one, teachers need good broadband connection. They need a good PC and laptop. They need good work from home conditions, so desk and chair, so they can really work healthily and safely. Good ICT skills, of course, good stamina. These competencies become really primary in the transition to online. And of course, you need to provide training, but when and how do you fit it in? Everyone, you know, we transitioned into intensive courses. So when do you fit it in? Because you have to be aware on the demands that you're placing on your teachers. So finding that balance is difficult. A lot of responsibility goes onto the teacher to self-train. So there's a real cliff face of a learning curve, very stressful. And then as we're building a new school, I had a new boss, a new team, so there's adapting to different styles. And of course, as you develop those new systems, those lines of responsibility aren't immediately clear. So you get overlap, you get overlooking. So you really need to set that out at the start as quickly as possible. And I mentioned HR. So HR is not the main part of a director of studies job really, but it has been so problematic. Just that transition at the beginning. So we went online, we were taking our students from our different schools, and so we were selecting our teachers as well from the group of schools. And the option was to work with us online full-time under new, quite stressful, challenging conditions, and with a pay cut which the company had to introduce very, very quickly as a survival measure, versus going on to furlough, which was the government scheme here in the UK. It was a way to protect the jobs of our staff, and they would be paid at 80%, but effectively they're not working. So that kind of immediately introduces a sort of bit of a psychological turmoil for everyone. There's that sort of, well, why have I been selected? Or perhaps why haven't I been selected? Are we going to have rotation? So yes, we want to have rotation, but again, that's another problem because of course our students want continuity, and the teachers working with us are immediately building up a lot of expertise. So bringing in new teachers, there's going to be a drop in quality perhaps. So you have to think about the training and induction process. So HR issues, you know, and what this furlough scheme means, you know, after weeks of being on furlough, when asked to be deployed, quite a lot of resistance and reluctance. But of course, this furlough scheme means you have to be available to work if called upon. And the senior team, you know, we're in a crisis. So they are very much in emergency mode. So unfortunately, once or twice, we've had one or two moments of real crisis in terms of the kind of regulations we're working through. Because they haven't perhaps been seen with a proper lead time, understandably so. So that whole element, very, very problematic and challenging. And just the learning, the lessons learned of working through a crisis, it is, as I said at the beginning, there's a real focus on the present. It is hard to sort of formulate strategy when you're under pressure. and also when you don't really have anything to base your experience on. There's no previous experience. So a lot of improvisation. You need to be quite agile. You really need to trust in and exploit your skills and competences that you have, and at the same time be quite nimble and look for new ones. And also you need to really provide stability for your team. There's a lot of stress, they're feeling overwhelmed, probably underappreciated, they're cut off from colleagues. So it's a real need to sort of focus on priorities, be wary of getting too excited about those sort of new initiatives that you might want to bring in. You sort of, let's stick with some priorities, be stable, learn from mistakes, but also really try and build optimism. You know, it's just such a difficult time. So you really have to look for the sort of points of optimism, share those, and try and build engagement and really show gratitude for the efforts your team are putting in. So I've probably talked enough. I mean, there's been some real lessons. We've learned a lot about online learning, online tools. We've developed systems, digital systems, which we can definitely bring back into our face-to-face schools when they reopen. And one other point is, it's been really interesting, working from home. I mean, apart from not having to iron shirts, that's been great. Haven't ironed a shirt in months, but absenteeism has near enough disappeared. It's very interesting. Not having to commute to work really helps with sickness and absenteeism. It's not near enough disappeared. So I think, as I say, I haven't talked a lot about what now, but we'll hear from the other panelists and open up to questions. So I'm going to pass back to Jenny. And
thanks,
yeah,
Josh.
thank you.
Thank you very much for that. That's great. I didn't say at the beginning, but we're actually sort of 5-6 minutes per panelist, and then afterwards we are opening for questions. So no, it's all right. No worries. Okay, so next, I'm delighted to have Nick Peachey. Thank you so much, Nick, for joining us here. Nick is Pedagogical Director of Peachey Publications, but he's also a very good friend of mine, and he's been in this online materials and teaching area for a very long time. Nick.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Yeah, I've been in the digital side of things since the last century, which makes me sound really old. Did my first online teaching class back in 1998. Yeah, I kind of come from this from a very privileged position as well, because, you know, a lot of the problems that people have had to face very suddenly over the last 3 months are things that I faced 5-6 years ago and have had time to reflect on and sort of build on. Although I'm in digital publishing now, and that's kind of what I want to talk about, I was kind of director of studies or head of learning for an online school for 2 years, and so had, you know, a couple of years to work through a lot of these problems and understand a lot of the challenges, and in a much less pressured way than everybody else has had to deal with it. So I was very lucky in that way. I've also, sort of part of my background, I worked with Eton for their Eton X online schools and helped spend a year developing, you know, an online model for materials delivery and sort of 100% online classes there. Previously, my previous experience with online teaching was for a couple of years with a company called English Up, and we had 70 teachers all over the world, and, you know, we were delivering something like 2,000 hours of lessons a month to students mainly in Brazil. So, you know, I had that kind of experience behind me to sort of build into this experience. In terms of the kind of materials development part, which is sort of my interest now as the director within a publishing company, you know, I've been sort of thinking around these problems for a long time, because, you know, as an online school, one of our problems was finding materials that were appropriate for delivery in this kind of environment. And, you know, and what we found was largely very unsatisfactory. You know, as we all know, I think, you know, the ELT publishing communities really come together well and helped a lot of schools out here by making lots of materials available for free and doing lots of wonderful things. But, you know, at the back of that, you know, our ELT publishing industry is built on the course book model of selling course books to students, and those are paper-based course books. And, this kind of environment throws them into disarray, especially if this is going to be going on for some time. There are a lot of problems for publishers in making money through publishing for this kind of environment. I know that because I do it. So there are publishers are in the position of, how do they protect copyright? How do they not cannibalize their coursebook market and destroy, what basically is their bread and butter? There are huge challenges in that. There are also challenges in actually developing materials that are really useful for this kind of environment and usable. And that's what we found. When I was working with English Up, we had the resource of going to a publisher and converting their paper-based materials for online delivery. And what we found was that, they weren't really appropriate. You need to build materials with this kind of environment in mind, with an understanding of the environment and what it can do and what the strengths are and what the problems are. And, and also perhaps with an understanding of what kind of blends are likely to happen, what kinds of things are you going to want to do in this kind of remote environment, what kind of things go online, all of that kind of thing, which is, becomes quite important to understand that. So sort of understanding your book model has to be the basis for the development of your materials. One of the big challenges we found was actually, if your students are looking at their computer screen and your materials being screen shared, what are they doing? Are they having to work with different computer tabs? Are they working on paper, on a notebook? Are they taking notes digitally? So thinking about ways to solve those kind of problems. We all know that if we want students to really interact with each other and actually practice speaking, of course, we need to get them into breakout rooms. What we were discovering, though, was every platform we used, as soon as the students went into the breakout rooms, the materials disappeared. So there was another problem. We wanted them to do role plays, but teachers were kind of having to set that up very messily with a PowerPoint presentation. They'd have to remember what they were doing before getting into their groups to do their role plays. And when moving students around, then, they lost those materials. The whole process was very messy and frustrating. Other problems were things like listening skills. You still want to develop listening skills. How does your audio work within this kind of environment? Are you having to upload and share an MP3 file, or are you, we found that some teachers had, the microphone from their headset next to the computer microphone so that students could listen. In some cases, the audio would come through the platform, but the audio file was on a CD-ROM somewhere or something like that. So, these are all problems that I've kind of worked on solving with my own materials, and I think, one of the biggest solutions or helps to solving the problems has been, QR codes and getting students to scan things on their QR codes. So one of the things that we've done, for example, in the materials is make all role play cards available on QR codes. So the teacher just needs a presentation with the QR code on. Each student can scan their materials onto their mobile phone with the QR code. Then they've still got it when they go into their breakout rooms, and they've got it there on their hand for reference, which also keeps their mobile phone a bit busier, so they're not sort of going off to do Facebook on it while they're in their breakout rooms as well. So those have been really useful. Having all of our material digitized, I use a technology called HTML5, which will run in any browser. So we're not sort of tied into any sort of having to download any sort of software, new software for the materials or anything like that. HTML5 will run equally well on a web browser or a browser within a mobile phone or a tablet, and should look pretty much the same except for the size. So, getting everything up into HTML5 and making, all classroom materials available that way was really good. It's also really good because we can embed in the audio then, and so students and teachers have got the material already embedded into their presentation and can play directly from it. So we're able to develop listening skills in that way. Some of the other problems that we had were also reading skills. You know, we still want to get our students reading, and we wanted specific text. So, you know, a lot of the materials in course books just didn't fit well on the screen, or they couldn't be read from the screen. So again, that's sort of been an issue in terms of breaking down, you know, reading texts and sharing them, and again using QR codes to scan them onto the mobile device, because they're much more reader friendly. You know, the mobile device adapts to them. I guess some of the other problems, one of the other problems was writing as well, you know, and having the tools to get students writing. And again, I've used HTML5 and a product called h5p.com, which enables you to build interactive activities and interactive sort of reading, listening, writing activities, so that students again can scan those onto their phone. They can do them interactively on their phone, and then sort of either email their results to the teacher, or they can get some results from the computer. So, you know, basically I've sort of looked around at various different technologies and totally rebuilt the materials that we use so that they work effectively in this environment. But I think, you know, moving forward, that's going to be a big challenge for a lot of publishers, because, you know, my publishing company doesn't work on the basis of, you know, students buying course books. It's actually only the teacher or the school that needs to buy the materials. And so, you know, we can survive on that. But if you're sort of one of the bigger publishers, I can see how that's going to present quite a lot of problems, you know, if you're not generating that revenue from course books. Yeah, I mean, that's about as much as I have to share at the moment. That's just about my 5 minutes up. So, you know, for me, the main things are, you know, digitizing the materials, finding technologies that work well with that. But the big problem, I think, going forward is, you know, at some point, you know, publishers are going to have to stop giving away their materials for free and start dealing with this new business model. And I think that's going to be where the big challenge is really going to come. And good luck to them.
Thank you very much, Nick. That was really helpful and useful. I don't know about many people here, but I'm not an online teacher at all. I'm actually doing a course right now with Cambridge Assessment English, which is which is a huge free course, and it's really helping a lot. A lot of what Nick has just said is kind of coming up in that area. Okay, I'm really delighted to introduce the next speaker now. This is Sandra Pitronaci from Sydney. She's Director of Studies at ILSC in Sydney, and she's also Reviews Editor of the English Australia Journal. Great to have you with us from all the way over there, Sandra.
Thanks, Jenny. Good to be here, and hi, folks. I wanted to, before I got stuck into what I was hoping to talk about, I wanted to just refer back to the first panel from a couple of weeks back, because I wanted to fiercely acknowledge George Pickering's hopes for inclusive and compassionate workplaces as a long-term change. So for those of you who were there 2 weeks ago, you might remember. And also I wanted to give a big nod to Michelle Ocliciano and servant leadership, because I'm a massive fan. So my context is essentially, as you said, Jenny, I'm DOS at ILSC Sydney, which is private multinational. So we've got campuses in Canada, Australia, one in New Delhi. I'm not a new DOS, but I was new to ILSC, so I started mid-Feb. And just as I was essentially getting to know the staff, the students, the curriculum, all the systems and processes, then bang, COVID hit, and we went online. So it was quite critical and quite challenging, really, for me to build a trust relationship with this new team in a virtual space. I wanted to talk a little bit about CPD, and during this online time, and I know you'll all have experienced a very similar scenario, some CPD was really quite necessary and appreciated, such as, you know, teaching through Zoom or whatever platform you're using Moodle, online assessment training and issues, challenges. So we did those, but then other CPD I left to open choice as much as I could. So essentially I wanted teachers to work on filling their own gaps, if you like. So reading as needed, reading up on online teaching and learning, watching tips videos as needed, doing peer obs through Zoom, doing peer observations through Zoom, observing each other. My rationale was that in this, toughest of moments of online transition, they knew what they needed much more than I did. So I left what I could to them. In terms of my active role in CPD, I did Zoom drop-ins to over 40 teachers. And we were doing this across all our campuses. It wasn't just me. But on our campus, I did the drop-ins to check in, see how they were going, offer support. And it gave me a fascinating macro view, in fact, of what was going on in that online learning and teaching world. And clearly, some teachers were much more adept at using the technology than others, but they were all equally earnest and focused on essentially doing their utmost to make it work. And so in my follow-up emails, after having dropped in, I felt that all I could do was give them my sincere thanks and encouragement, because they really didn't need constructive feedback or performance management at that point in time. So it was more just showing gratitude and being thankful that they were surviving and keeping things rolling. Our context now has flipped again, so we're back face-to-face. At least in the Australian campuses, our 4 campuses in Australia at ILSC. And we've been back face-to-face the last 4 weeks. Clearly, we're operating under very strict state-based workplace health and safety guidelines. Many things have had to change. So we normally have a 3-shift timetable, but that's turned into like a 7-tiered staggered timetable. So students are all coming in and leaving at different times. To avoid mingling. The breaks are happening inside the classroom. We've got signage and hand sanitizer every which way you turn. But there's a very exciting vibe. There's an exciting vibe to being back face to face, to seeing our students, to seeing each other. But of course, and this I think resonates with what Josh was saying before, the difficulty or the challenge that we have now, which I'm sure all of you are having, is that of having to make difficult staff deployment decisions due to a shrinking timetable. And of course, there are different views on how this should be done, on who or what should be prioritized in terms of work. And with my team in Sydney, I've taken a job share approach. And this is a reflection of what I hope to be our culture of compassion. So to this point, most people have dropped days, and I'm hoping that we'll manage to get through as long as we can by job sharing. This, of course, brings its own challenges, again, like Josh mentioned, and that is that essentially what we're left with is, so we have this distribution of work, we have to make these decisions, but we've got these competing values. And I touched on this with my national colleagues in our LAMSIG last week, and that is, it's the concept of moral plurality or values pluralism. So essentially there are all different values that are valuable in different ways to different people. And this is a concept described by Isaiah Berlin, a 20th century British, I think Latvian born philosopher, who essentially heavily disputed the notion of there being one universal truth that would outweigh all other truths, or one right over all wrongs. Instead, we've got multiple truths, we've got multiple rights, and we have to weigh the relative value of each right against the other. The tricky part is that some of these rights are mutually exclusive. Yeah. So, for example, if you've got to choose, if you've got to cut down teachers on your timetable, do you employ the teacher with a lot of experience who's been there for years, or do you employ the teacher who is new but developing exceptionally well? Yeah. So they're both right. And of course, as academic managers, in deciding how to share out this work, and in choosing from amongst these multiple rights, at the moment, it's especially hard to reconcile, knowing that we essentially are having a huge impact on people's livelihoods now more than ever. And if I think of the ELT values that represent these different rights, to me, they're the skills, they're the aptitudes that are closely related to CPD, to performance, to collegiality. And these are, for example, technical skills, linguistic skills, attitude, commitment to CPD, mentorship of colleagues, quality teaching as seen through classroom observations, and quality teaching as seen through learner surveys, constructive contribution to the centre, ability to integrate feedback, and many, many other values. So it's quite a complex system, really, or if I can quote Adrian Underhill, it's a mess. And of course, encompassing that is the student needs. We can't forget those. There are the organisational needs. There are financial imperatives. And we're tasked with a certain level of stewardship of the organisation. So it's not an easy place for us to be, especially at this point in time. So basically, as you find yourselves with shrinking student numbers and therefore having to rationalise the timetable and make those difficult decisions of reducing people's days or letting people go entirely, despite what your teachers might suggest to be their top value, which I find is often longevity or loyalty, to decide which values are most valuable to you as the academic manager, because you're the custodian of the learning and teaching side of the organisation, and of course to the organisation, to the students' needs, the organisational needs, etc. So my suggestion is to try to take the edge off for both you, yourself and your colleagues by again focusing back on this culture of compassion. And to my final point really is Simon Sinek, for example, talks about the power of why, yeah? And I like to think about the power of yes. So the power of yes in a culture of compassion. And that is the power of when a request is put to us, it's so easy to immediately say, no, sorry, don't have time. Or sorry, too hard, too much paperwork. Instead, I consider, and wherever we can say yes, I think I can make that work. It's just too easy to say no as a leader. The harder route, the more compassionate route is having the courage to say yes and then somehow making it work. So try to give your colleagues what they ask for whenever you can, and it can just be the small things, a room change, just teaching on a specific shift, a last minute day off, despite what your leave policy might say. Essentially, if you can do it, do it. Don't worry about the extra time, the extra paperwork that it costs you, because really that's negligible compared to how you may have eased them through a moment of difficulty and how you may have spread compassion, which is important because we know that behaviour is contagious. So to conclude, when you've got to make those difficult timetabling decisions, consider all the competing values, knowing that some of them will be mutually exclusive. There's no way around that. And try to make the most ethical and the most responsible decisions you can towards people, yeah, your students as well as your staff, and the most ethical and the most responsible decisions you can towards your organisation, and then try to get a good night's sleep. And that's it from me.
Thank you, Sandra. Some wonderful points there in terms of teachers and looking after them and values. That's really, really good. I'm going to watch that again once this is over. Thank you so much. As I've just put, if you have any questions for any of the panelists, please put them into the chat box so that we can bring them up when Sandy has finished. But right now, I'm delighted to introduce Sandy. She's a Director of Studies in International Health in Poland, Bydgoszcz, I think you say. And she's actually going to talk about what happens in the classroom itself, what might a new classroom look like in the new situations. And we look forward to that. Sandy.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, there's so many ideas have come out of all of these talks from last time and this time. And I wanted to reiterate that kind of feeling of panic that we've had that Josh was talking about, of like, how are we going to do this in a different way? And like what Sandra was just saying about compassion and about trying to make things as smooth as possible for the teachers, but also the importance of a good night's sleep for ourselves. Like, I think it's so easy to, like, I certainly know at the beginning I was not sleeping well because I was spending so long thinking about, you know, worrying about what the teachers were doing and what was happening. I'm lucky that we're working, because I'm working in Poland, we actually haven't really lost any of our hours. A couple of teachers decided to leave, but I haven't had to deal with those difficult decisions of who's working and who's not. What I've had to do is try and make sure that teachers who've lost students still have the same amount of work, that there's a perception of fairness with everything. So I think those are all feelings that we've had, and it's so nice to hear that it's not just me that's had those problems, so thank you. Yeah, so it's actually our last day of the school year today, and I am very ready for a holiday, but that means that for the last week or so we've been thinking about what might happen in September. Now, I worked out yesterday that it's 13 weeks since we moved online, and it's 14 weeks until the beginning of our next school year. And as we've seen, 13 weeks, a lot can change. So we're thinking about social distancing in September, but Poland's been back open for 4 or 5 weeks now. And sometimes I go outside and it's like nothing's happened. I see groups of people, there's no social distancing, they're not wearing masks. And I'm trying to imagine a school in September and trying to persuade people to actually listen to us when we're talking about social distancing in the classroom. But I don't think it's likely that we'll be able to go back into the classroom in September without having social distancing. So I've been thinking about what that means for the school, for the students, and for the teachers. So in terms of what we might need to think about with social distancing, so there's the obvious thing of the amount of space between people and the number of people that means you can have in a room. But then there are other things that we might not have thought about. For example, which direction are the people facing in? There are things that say that if you're face-to-face with somebody, you're at a higher risk, whereas if you're side-to-side, you're at a lower risk. So maybe that means they can be slightly closer if they're side-to-side versus face-to-face. Thinking about whether masks are required or not. Maybe masks are required when you're moving through the school, but not at your desk. Maybe they're required all the time. Maybe by then people will be refusing to wear masks. How do you make sure they're wearing them over their nose and their mouth? Because if you're just wearing it over your mouth, you might as well not be wearing it. Are there other methods we can use to screen people from each other? So looking at some of the classrooms in China, for example, where they've gone back already, some children have a desk with like a plastic screen around them. Julie Wallace was talking to me about the way that they've run exams. So they've got plastic screens in between their desks in the exam so that they can, so they don't have to wear a mask while they're doing their Cambridge exams. We also need to think about how the room's ventilated. So it's not just having ventilation, but it's also which direction the draft is going in. Because if I cough and it's coming from behind me, those droplets are going towards you. But if I cough and it's coming at me, they'll come back to me. And it seems like a minor thing, but it could be the difference between people getting infected and not. We've also got to think about cleaning surfaces and also the amount of time that we're spending in one room with a group of people. So I didn't realise when I came up to, I'm actually at school now, I didn't realise when I came up to this classroom that my director has actually set it out already to try and work out how many people we could have in this classroom. So I can actually show you that this is what our socially distanced classroom might look like. So we've got a room that normally holds 10 people, and now it's got space for 8, we think. So you can see that the chairs are quite spread out. There are still some spare chairs at the front, but you can see there's one person stuck in the corner who potentially can't see the board. Are we going to put tape on the floor so they've got a kind of box that they're in so they know where to go? Is it the case that the first person in the door will sit furthest away and the last person will sit closest to the door? And so maybe they're going to work with different people each time if they're coming in at different times. If we want to do pair work, so for example, I've got oh, hang on, I've got 4 people here. This person can work with this person, or they can work with this person, or maybe they can work diagonally. So they can still work in different pairs, but they just can't move around. They can move their chair within their box, but they can't get closer, for example. Another idea that we've had is that potentially we're probably going to have some kind of hybrid model where half of the classes will be online and half of the classes will be face-to-face. So if you have a Monday, Wednesday class, for example, some groups will have Monday online, Wednesday face-to-face, and some groups will have Monday face-to-face, Wednesday online. And that means we can use our bigger rooms twice, but also we're reducing the risk for everybody involved because they're spending less time in a room with the group of people. They're only doing it for 90 minutes a week instead of 3 hours a week. And they're also getting the benefits of both the face-to-face and the online classroom, because I think all of us have realized that some people and some things that you do online aren't possible face-to-face. Both of them are great ways to work if you know how to use them correctly. And if, as Josh was saying, I think, if you have the right connection, the right desk, the right chair, also if we're mixing online and face-to-face classes, then potentially that gives us more time to clean a classroom in between. We don't have 3 slots with 15 minutes in between each class. We might have a face-to-face, then an online, then a face-to-face class, or, you know, so we're not having to work around lots of groups of people. We still have that problem of our corridors are quite narrow, our stairs are quite narrow. Even if it's a one-way system, you're not necessarily going to have 2 people far enough apart, even if they're coming in spaced out. What happens when you have 70 people leaving, 70 people arriving, plus the associated parents? You've got 240 people in a crunch point, and there's only one way in and out of the school. So, you know, there's so many things to think about, but I also think it gives us the opportunity again to be creative with our teaching. We'll go back into the classroom, but it's not the same classroom we were in before. We're going to have to keep thinking. And you know, it's been a stressful 3 months, but I have also really loved learning how to work in a different way. I have not been so fired up about my teaching for years, I don't think. I've really enjoyed it. So yeah, so I think there are challenges, but I think there's a lot of opportunities there for us as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Sandy. That was really, again, another from another angle, a really useful and practical look at how things are going to be for a while, at least, anyway. Would any of the panel like to come back on anything that any of the other panelists have said at this point?
Yeah, I'd like to pose a question, actually, something that I'm quite interested in. You know, traditionally online learning and this kind of learning has been, and the companies that do it have been seen as the kind of bottom feeders, if you like. You know, there are loads of companies all around the world offering really cheap lessons with, you know, native speakers who potentially aren't qualified at all and who aren't teachers, you know, and those companies are already well structured to do and deliver these kind of services online, you know, and have been doing it for ages with very badly paid teachers in a lot of cases. You know, when it comes to sort of competing with those, if the future means competing with these companies, do you feel confident that, you know, you can assure your students that you can give them a good quality experience online and face-to-face that is competitive with these kind of companies, and that kind of still maintains, you know, the kind of the price that you'll need to charge for it, basically, in order to sort of pay teachers properly for you to hire good teachers? Big question. Anyone?
Well, I'll have a go, Nick, because yeah, I've been asking myself the same question, I suppose. I mean, we're definitely developing a model which is perhaps more similar to what's out there, like you were saying. We're sort of going for an online model which is more extensive rather than this current intensive thing we're doing. And I think maybe we're being naive, but we're hoping that our sort of reputation for quality stands us in good stead. And I don't know if it will. Like you say, there's lots of fierce competition out there at much lower prices. I don't know, what have we had, about 10, 11 weeks with quite a lot of our previous face-to-face students with us. We've obviously been gathering feedback. We've also had moments where we've asked students to post on a sort of online board, you know, how is it going? What have you been progressing? The feedback we had was superb and incredibly positive and grateful. And so I don't know whether the word of mouth may help us from that, but I don't know. It's a difficult question, and I haven't got a crystal ball working yet. So
yeah, I think it is a really tricky one. That one, that the idea of quality, and why would they come to you rather than to somebody else? It's a difficult one.
But I think we've always had a problem. I don't think that's a new problem. I think we've always been competing with them, and now we're building up expertise in online teaching. So I don't think that's a new problem.
Good. That's a hopeful response, Sandy. Thanks. I've got a question here for Sandra, and isn't the learner-teacher relationship that has suffered most? Isn't prioritizing that relationship the most important thing right now? A learner-teacher relationship.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. You have to prioritize that. You have to prioritize that relationship, because you know, we all know a manager makes for happy teachers, makes for happy students. But by the same token, it's a double-edged sword at the moment, that you're going to have no choice, unfortunately, but to potentially let some of those people go, despite the good relationships. And I saw another question just before, actually, how do you guard against accusations of favoritism when allocating teachers? And how do you make compassionate decisions transparent and fair? So when I was a younger manager, I'd lie awake at night for hours with the timetable, and you know, you have your peaks and troughs, and needing to decide who do you deploy. And I tried being transparent a few times, and I explained to the teachers, to some of the teachers, what all the variables were, and how none of those variables trumped the other, and how all those variables would change according to what else was happening at the time, and that I couldn't cement them in stone, because then I'd just be painting myself into a corner. And it didn't work. It didn't help, because each teacher still placed their number one value as the number one of all those competing values. And so instead, what I learned over time is that, yes, be obviously as fair as you can. Tell them that, you know, you'll be looking at a range of variables, including performance, contribution, etc. But don't try to give them numbers or figures or anything like that. Do let them know that if you have concerns, if you have worries about performance, that you'll get in touch with them and you'll work on development, because that's where you should always start. But as managers, we really, once we've accepted this position of stewardship, we really have no choice but to square our shoulders and happiness. That's our job. And it's not fun. And I had a teacher meeting this afternoon, and, you know, teachers were asking about, you know, the drop in hours, etc. And they were wondering why some teacher A got more days than teacher B. And I said to them, guys, don't resent each other, because the people who are getting employed aren't making the decisions to get employed. So it's our job to have to just essentially, and you might be accused of favoritism. All you can do is say, you know, I can't change the way you feel, but I'm doing the best I can to the best of my knowledge in the situation that we're in.
Josh, you may want to come in on that a little bit. Al Krishna asked a question, what role should a manager play during this time? It's all linked up.
Yeah, well, firstly, definitely relate to what Sandra's just said. That's a real difficult balancing act you have to play, and I think she's right. You just have to take it on the chin and do your best. In terms of the role of the manager, I mean, during this period, for me, it's really been about, as much as possible, supporting the team. You know, as Sandra said as well, you know, you think about performance management and quality assurance and that kind of thing, but the primary focus has really been on how and where can we support the team, what barriers are they experiencing, and you need empathy to what's going on. You need to listen and understand the issues, and support as well for trying to build that sense of community. I think, I mean, we pulled teachers from different schools, so they didn't all know each other. So that community, which I think teachers really, you know, we all love that community in our schools, the staff room, the connections and relationships you build. So how do you do that online? So I think you really got to find ways to do that, and also, you know, make sure you're available and visible. I mean, we've set up a virtual staff room, for example. It hasn't massively worked because I think during the breaks, and we've encouraged, you know, we've told all our teachers, you've got to get a screen break, get off the screen when you have your breaks. But I will regularly say, look, everyone, I'm in the staff room at this time today, if you want to drop in. Or you sort of post a calendar where people can select a time for a one-to-one chat. You know, let's catch up and see how things are going. So just being available and, as much as possible, offering support and being wary about demands that you're putting on your teachers.
Thanks. Sandy, anything to add to that?
Communication. I think it's always, it doesn't matter what you're doing. As Sandra was saying, you know, sometimes you just have to say to them, I'm really sorry, I am working bloody hard to make this work. I don't want to make your life harder, but at some point I've got to make a decision. And like, I think there's, and I mean, somebody's asking in the chat as well about observations, drop-ins, when's the right time to go back to providing developmental feedback. Like, all of those things are about communication. Like, knowing, you know, one person might be ready to receive that, another person might not. You've got to know your team, and you've got to know what they need from the situation. Like Josh was saying there about support as well. Like, we did drop-ins for all of our teachers as well. Some of the teachers, like, as soon as we went onto Zoom, they were in their element. I could give them developmental feedback immediately. They love it. Like, one of them said after a week, I don't want to go back to the classroom. That's it, I'm done. Like, so I could give them developmental feedback immediately. Somebody else who still after 3 months was like, I don't like teaching on Zoom. The students don't enjoy it. Like, I can't give them that developmental feedback. They're not ready to hear it. So it's about still being aware of the needs of your team, even if they're on the other side of a screen. And I think, for example, something that I've tried to do is make sure, I tried to do it every week, but it's tended to be every 2 weeks, that I've had at least one individual conversation that's lasted for at least 10 minutes with every single member of my team, including writing like a list in my diary of who I've spoken to that week. Okay, who haven't I spoken to? So that I can stay in touch with them and they still feel like I'm available and care about what they're doing and how they feel. And I think it all comes back to what kind of culture of support and as you were saying, compassion are you creating in the school? And yeah, the teachers are going to kick back, they are going to be angry, they're going to be frustrated. But I think also another really useful thing that I learned about is the stages of grief, the Kubler-Ross curve, when you talk about how do people deal with change. And at the beginning of that is anger and fighting back. And if you accept that that is a stage that they have to go through, it makes it a lot easier for you to deal with it. Since I learned about that, I no longer kick back. I don't fight back. I just accept that they've got to go through that. and then I wait for the next day or the next week when they've had time to process those emotions, and then I can go back to them and say, right, okay, are we ready to talk about this now? Have you got the emotional, are you through the emotional stage? Can we talk about the rational stage, the logical stage now? And since I've learned about that, it's made a huge difference to the quality of my communication and to my sanity as well, I think.
Great point, Sandy. That's lovely. If you can just put into the chat box the model there that you were talking about. Thanks a lot. We've kind of mentioned it, but it does lead into what does teacher development program in an online school look like? Somebody's asked in the chat box about observations. How do you manage that? How can that be managed? So perhaps if Josh, Sandra, Sandy would like to come back on any of that. Josh.
Well, one thing, I mean, we've had weekly team meetings where we've tried to ensure opportunities for the team to collaborate and share best practices, remembering, of course, that the teachers are becoming the experts, every day, much more than me. But we've also tried to provide some sort of asynchronous activities, mainly, which serves two purposes, really. We really wanted to encourage our teachers to integrate tools which allow for asynchronous learning. And so we've done team building activities using some of these tools. A really nice example was there's a tool called Flipgrid where you can take a very short video of yourself in response to a task and post it, and then you can watch other videos and comment. So it's a nice tool for use with your learners, but we set it as a team activity over a week, and so a great way for the teachers to learn about the potential of this kind of tool we want them to try and use, and at the same time to build that sense of community. We set a task. What have been your lockdown lifesavers? So everyone sort of posted these really nice 1 or 2 minute videos about themselves in their home, something that has really kept them sane and happy. So watching those videos was really uplifting and positive. So really helping to build that sense of team. So I think those kind of models, I don't know, what about you, Sandra? Have you had some ideas for teacher development online?
I really avoided it, I have to say, other than allowing teachers the time and the space to do their own development and then offering what they asked for. I think it really, it's relative to the amount of time you're going to be online, in my mind. So for us, we went through the survive phase, but before we got to thrive, well, no, I think we hit thrive for a couple of weeks, but then we were back face to face. So I'd say when you do, I think at a certain point you do need to observe your teachers, but just take baby steps. And then again, take the edge off by being as flexible as you can with them. So for example, I would email them and say, hi everyone, I'd like to observe a few of you this week. Let me know when's good for you. And so of course, the confident ones will start with them. And then the following week, I've observed 10 people. I'd like to see a few more. You'll get the stragglers towards the end. And I remember a particular teacher, we had this long, deep philosophical email conversation about the observer's paradox, etc., etc. And it got to the point where I said to him, hey mate, look, I'm not even going to give you feedback. I just want to pop in and say hi. And we did that. And then I emailed him afterwards and I said, that was actually a great lesson. Hope you survived. And he said, yeah, that wasn't too bad after all. So I'd only be doing that for the first couple of months and then letting the teachers direct it. If you're going to stay online a lot longer, honestly, I think you should be coming up with an online classroom teaching observation policy for starters. Decide together, perhaps, what the important points are, what the important criteria are with your teachers, and then walk through that process together, because it's observing online is just as new as teaching online. So we're not going in as experts ourselves by any means.
I'll just add, we continued with our weekly workshops. We still had a weekly workshop every week, but it changed at the beginning. It changed much more to sharing sessions. So we had a Google Doc open, they all went into breakout rooms, and there was a particular task, and it was mostly activities. It was like warmers, revision activities, what websites could you use with the students, like that kind of thing, and activities to get movement into the lessons. We built up a huge bank of activities because the teachers had been trying all kinds of different things, and that worked really well, but it wouldn't work forever. We did it for 3 or 4 weeks, and then kind of the 4th time we did it, they were like, that was really pointless, didn't learn anything. So we still need that variety of workshops, but as a model that worked really well to use occasionally, I think.
Nick's just put a good comment into the chat box. You can get teachers to record a section of their class and submit it for feedback. It's pretty low stress and puts the teacher in control. Good point. It's actually 11 o'clock. I'm okay to carry on for a bit, but obviously if people need to leave because it's an hour, then please,
my battery's
don't worry
going to
about
die very soon.
Okay, yeah, exactly.
Jenny, I'm going to stop the recording so it's not too long if we upload it. So I'm going to say thanks for everyone for being here. I've got to head out into an observation. And then as soon as we've got the recording, everything sorted, it will be up on YouTube and later in the LAMSIG area where members can watch it. But thank you very much for everybody being here. And thanks a lot to Nick and Sandy and Sandra and Josh and Jenny for doing this.
Thank you, Gerhard.
Thanks for the
great.
invitation.
Thank you.